we couldn't do it last Thursday. The reason for that was that we were supposed to be going away for Sue's 50th birthday, which has been delayed since April, and then that all fell through too. So we still went. So she's still 49. Yeah. But so Campfire Tales has been going since March, and at the start of the lockdown, and it's been hosted throughout every single week for a couple of months, and then monthly by Soul Hub, which is Carmen Rendell. You'll see one of the pictures up in the corner, and you'll see that she's the one who let you in into the meeting this evening. And her platform is called Soul Hub, and it's the place that your heart desires, and it's all about connection, Carmen, if I'm correct.
That is right.
There's lots and lots of things going on in Soul Hub and the Soul Hub platform and the Soul Hub school. And one of the things that Sue and I are doing on that platform, for example, is dancing once or twice a week with Andrew, we can only see his shoulder. There he is. So Andrew's also part of the Soul Hub.
I'm having my dinner.
That's good.
So there's a lot of things going on with Soul Hub, but one of them is storytelling and reconnection with people in the safari industry, the telling of stories, and just staying connected to nature in these curious times that we live in. And as you know, we've had various people on as guests. And this evening it's going to be Pete Allison. Now, Pete, Sue and I have known Pete since 1999. I had to work it out, Pete. It's 22 years, unbelievably.
Yeah.
And we met at a camp called Mambo, which some of you may well know and have been to in the Okavango Delta.
Oh, yeah.
And so, and we had the privilege of being at Pete and Prue's wedding in Cape Town. I don't know how many years ago that was, Pete, 6, 7, 8, something like that.
6 years. Well, you know, it was on your 20th wedding anniversary, so you figure it out.
Okay, good, on the exact same day. So we've been mates for a long, long time. Pete and I used to work at one time for Wilderness Safaris, and we've all improved ourselves since then. But I'll hand over to Pete to introduce himself and tell you who he is and what he does.
Hi, everybody. There's many, many familiar faces and if not faces, names here. Some of the faces not so happy to see, so you can switch your camera off, Grant. Grant's one of the only people in here that I've known longer than Lloyd. Goes back to 96. And I have been in the safari world since 1994. I began a little place called a Doobie Game Lodge in South Africa. Moved to Botswana with an already aging Lloyd Camp, who forgot we didn't meet at Mambo. We actually met with my license.
That's right.
And then didn't reconnect for every year. And I thought, this seems like a nice guy, and he's got a sense of humor. Be fun to work with him. And luckily enough, about a year or so later, we did end up working together. I became a guide. I kept destroying vehicles. They made me a camp manager, and then I started destroying camps, and that was even more expensive. So I made a guide trainer, and as you can imagine, destroyed a whole bunch of guides. So after that, I wasn't sure the next step. Diverted into a few other things. I've been in travel and tourism for 28 years now. I'm back in the safari business for over a decade. And now I'm in sales and marketing because apparently they think I can't break a desk. And I work for a company called Natural Selection. We're in Botswana, Namibia, and South Africa so far. Some exciting new developments. Even at this crazy time, there's still places we're looking to expand into. We run trips into Angola, really wanting to pioneer tourism there. If we can get ecotourism into Angola, rather than them just going heavy industry, it's enormously important for places like the Okavango Delta and the Chobe and the Kondo and the
Good, I'm going to work.
love. And I also, somehow in between all of that, shut up, Lloyd, wrote a few books, 2 of them about Africa, 1 about South America. And first one was really successful. They got less successful as they went on because I think I used all my best lines in the first one. So that's pretty much it. And if you do hear any background noise from my side, those who logged in a bit later, my wife and I are suffering a crisis at the moment, which is directly over my head, is a 4-year-old who's decided she's allergic to sleep. So if you hear all the screaming and so on, that's what's going on in this household. Back to you, Lloyd.
Okay. All right. Thanks, mate. As you know, I've written a couple of books, but the person that inspired me to do those, who encouraged and actually kicked my ass a little bit, was Pete. He wrote this book. That's one of the ones that he's referring to. Don't Run Whatever You Do. What's it called? My Adventures as a Safari Guide by Pete Allison. It's a very good read, and if you fancy a bit of reading about safari, get hold of that book. Well worth it. Just a little update in terms of the second one I've written. I've finished yesterday doing the Audible version of this, and so it should be available on Audible, who knows, in about a month or 6 weeks, I reckon. But let's get on to some stories. The theme of this evening is called Games, Guides, Play. And the premise behind that is the fact that sometimes the guests on safari tend to put the guides on a bit of a pedestal, which can be slightly embarrassing. Because as you well know, everybody's human. And the reality is that guides, although they do create magic and share an invigorating, incredible experience with you in a place that they love working in, and which we've been cruelly denied this year, I'm afraid. As with anybody and in any job, there are plenty of shortcuts to creating that magic, plenty of tricks and plenty of backstories. And guides are full of foibles as anybody is. So safari people are human too. Now, I don't know what Pete's going to be talking about this evening. I deliberately didn't really ask him. And so it'll be interesting to see what he has to say. But I thought I'd start off with a story this evening about, which illustrates the fact that although guides are knowledgeable and personable and living in an incredible environment and doing the thing that they love to do, the fact is that sometimes they don't do a very good job. And this is not because they don't want to necessarily, but because the pressure of the job, just like in any job, can get to them. And they can sometimes let their safari clients down a little bit. You know, if you're getting towards the end of a long dry season and the temperatures are mid-30s every single day, and the diesel's running low in camp, and vehicles are getting stuck in crossings and all sorts of other self-inflicted miseries, your concentration can slip. And typically, guides don't really get enough sleep. That's partly because sometimes they drink too much and stay up too late. But generally, they don't really sleep enough. And as the season drags on, especially in the heat, accidents can happen. And this story revolves a little bit around that. But one of the points I want to make is that even at times when guides and lodges are not performing at their best, the difference in the performance that they produce is often dependent on the clients that are on the car, because nature tends to be fairly regular, reasonably predictable. But of course, the people on the vehicle or walking with you or in the lodges vary tremendously, and you just don't know what you're going to get. And so as a client, and it's very much the same as going out for dinner, for example, the way the waiter or waitress treats you depends very much on your attitude and how much fun you prepare to have that evening. So that's what this story is about. Now, as you know, I lead lots of walking safaris in Africa, amongst other kinds of safaris. And this particular story is about a walking safari which I conducted up the Savuti Channel to a place called the Zabalianja Lagoon in Botswana, in the northern part of Botswana, where the Zabalianja Lagoon backflows, where the Kwanda River backflows into the Zabalianja Lagoon. And we were supposed to be met. There's a lot of guys on this forum will know it very well. There's a Mapani log bridge just south or east of the lagoon. And we were supposed to be met there by a particular guide, who in this instance will remain nameless. But he wasn't there. He had gone into town having made some excuse and not returned. But he was the preeminent walking guide in the area, and he was the guide that I'd contracted. They managed to dig him out of whichever hole he was hiding in and wash him and scrub him and and put him on a plane. And so he only got to the reserve the next day. And I was very angry about the fact that he disrupted our safari. And he was very, very jumpy about the fact that he'd let us down. However, he was very determined to make up for this. Now, one of the things he asked me when he arrived was, what is it that you want to see? And I said to him, we'd seen a lot of things, but we were a bit short of lions. We'd not seen many lions. They'd been at a distance. Remember that this is a walking safari, so you don't usually get particularly close to lions, depending on how you approach them. And that night, we were staying at a camp called Cylinder Camp. And the lions started roaring. And there was a lion there that they used to call the boss, and he was the dominant lion in that area. And there were other younger lions around. He would roar all through the night, and the youngsters would sometimes reply to him, but at a distance. And in the middle of the night, this lion started to roar. And it was May, and it was cold, and we were wrapped up, and I was sharing a room with this particular guide, and I was still peeved with him, and we weren't really speaking, and I was needing to get over myself so that the safari experience wouldn't be negatively affected. Now, this is where the guide can make a difference. This is where you don't all get treated the same. He had ground to make up, this guy, but what he did was something that most guides wouldn't bother to do. And it was at about 5 o'clock in the morning. And normally what happens when lions roar is that you sit up in bed so you can hear where they are and try and figure out how far away they are and what direction they're moving, and so that when the sun comes up, you can anticipate them, where to go, try and track them, and then share that experience with your guests. And in this case, we would have to drive closer and then get out on foot. And this guy was an extremely good walking guide. And he said to me at about, I'd say 4:30 in the morning, he said, that lion is the boss. I know his voice. Each lion has a different sounding voice. He said, I know exactly where that lion is, which one it is, where he's heading, and we need to go and find him. And I said, yeah, well, obviously. And he said, no, I think we should go right now. Now, that guide was putting himself under a lot of pressure. And a good guide is able to do this because he knew that by getting us up early and getting us out in the dark and driving closer and getting us out on foot before the rising of the sun, that the rest of the guides were basically just going to hate him for the rest of the time that he was there, because they would be under pressure from their guests. When their guests got up and saw that we'd already gone and we're out looking for lions, their obvious question was going to be, so what about us? How come we don't get treated the same? We've paid the same amount of money. Why aren't we out there with those guides? And that's why guides tend to have a consensus about how to operate, so you don't create that kind of jealousy and dissatisfaction in the camp. But this guy didn't care. And we left in the dark. We went and woke the people up. There was no coffee available. Our hair was sticking. Our pajamas were underneath our jackets. And we went out and we drove for about 30 or 40 minutes. And when we got to where he said this lion was, and you can imagine the skill involved in predicting that. He said, and we got off the car and he said, look here, you can see the sun was just coming up. And he said, look, you can see in the very sharply angled morning light, you can see the tracks very, very clearly. And he said, this lion is walking, and it's walking fast, and you can see his tracks here, and he's going in that direction down a big wide elephant path, and he's chasing away that other younger lion, and we'll find him on foot. And we started to follow. But the reality is, and I could see that.
I've got the safari talk.
Who's that there? Who's got a safari talk? So I knew that we couldn't catch up to this lion on foot. And I said to this guy, this isn't going to work. The tracks are getting slightly older as we go. So what are we going to do about this? Now, remember the theme of this evening is games guides play. And this is one of the games that this guy plays, and I've seen him do it several times, is he makes the sound of a dying animal. And he made that sound and it echoed through the woodland. And I said, and the guest said, what's he doing? And I said, he's making the sound of a dying antelope. And he says, it's not just an antelope, it's a wildebeest. It's quite specific. That noise is a wildebeest, and that's the one that'll bring this animal in. And he said, come and let's sit in this termite mound. And we went up onto this termite mound about 20 meters or so from the elephant path. And he said, you must just wait here. Now, a funny thing happened. While we're sitting there and waiting in great anticipation, and the sun was just rising, I heard a squirrel starting to chatter, as they do when they sometimes see predators. And I noticed that he went and had a look and looked into the bush. There's some broadleaf scrub there called croton, and he was looking into this croton. And I said, what are you doing? He said, oh, there was a leopard there. And I was shocked. I said, but why didn't you tell us there was a leopard so we could see? He said, no, we're looking at lions. We'll look at leopards later. This is all about lions today. So again, I was a bit peeved with the guy because we could have had a leopard sighting on foot too, but he was very focused on the lions. We looked. After a while, we then sat there very, very quietly, and I started to wonder whether this guy was actually going to, pull the rabbit out of the hat. And then in the distance, I could hear the sound of an animal running. And there's a stand of grass. It's turpentine grass. It's very tall stuff, very thick, difficult to penetrate. So elephants push their way through it, and all the animals and humans, especially on walking safari, you tend to use these elephant paths because they give you easy access. And as we looked down this elephant path, you could hear the sound of this lion as he came through this turpentine grass, brushing it with his shoulders. And you could hear the sound of his feet. And the sun was behind him. And he ran towards us. Now, remember, we're on foot and we 20 meters away from the path. We're sitting on a termite mound. We're sitting dead still, totally quiet. You're on foot. And this animal came running down. And it was one of the most exhilarating moments. There's a feeling of superiority, as if you get up early before anybody else and you get something done. And that's what we were doing that morning. And this lion was huge. He was a massive, muscular, big-maned lion. And you can imagine the intake of breath as this massive, beautiful animal. When they run, their shoulder blades rise and fall like this. And he was very, very intent on finding this wildebeest that had been killed. And he ran straight past us, and everybody was as good as gold. Of course, nobody was going to move because they were mostly scared. And that lion ran straight to where that guide had been standing when he made that particular call. And he stood there and he sniffed around and he looked at the tracks. And what I kept thinking was, how come he can't see or smell us? He must have been able to smell us. He must have seen our tracks, surely. And what did he make of that? But I never got the answer because he stood around for about 3 or 4 minutes and he sniffed and he looked. He never saw us. He was very, very focused on finding that kill. I think he couldn't believe that something had been killed behind him just minutes after he'd gone through there. And he was very confused about that. And eventually he turned and then he went back up the path, back past us again, but this time just walking. And each time he walked, each time he made footfall, there was a little puff of dust. And you could see the silica shining in the sun because the sun was still so low. A little puff of dust. And he started to walk. And as he walked further and further, he started to pick up speed, and then he started to roar. And for those of you who've been on safari and experienced that, when you're close to a lion and it roars, your internal organs shake and shiver. It's an incredible experience. If you're in a Land Rover, it causes parts of the Land Rover to vibrate. It's an amazing thing to witness and to hear. And that's what he started to do. And he roared and he walked off back up the elephant path. When he'd been gone for a few minutes, we quietly got up. Not a word was spoken. The guide, who had leaned he had a .375 rifle. I noticed for the first time he didn't even have it in his hand. It was just leaning against a big knob thorn tree that was on this termite mound. And then he picked it up and we slowly walked away, and we walked all the way back to the car on a different route. And it was a wonderful scene because there were little herds of impalas and zebras, I remember, and a few giraffes in the woodland. and in this Combretum woodland with short grass. And we walked all the way back to the car without speaking. When we got back to camp, the other guides were just rolling out of camp, and they were going to go and find that lion, and they were going to see that lion. But it was our second to last day of safari, and there was something about that day that couldn't be beaten. And so we actually never went out again that morning or that day. We actually just spent the whole of the rest of the day in camp watching animals coming down to the river to drink. And it was a moment of pure magic. And so with the theme about games guides play, two things come to mind. One is that guy let us down very badly. I suspect actually that he was just drunk and, in Maun, and they had to rouse him, and they got him out to us the next day. And secondly, he made up for it because he produced an experience for us that was almost unparalleled in my experience of walking with lions. And it was a wonderful, wonderful thing. And those people walk with me to this day, every May, and they still talk about that particular experience. So that's one of the games that guides play to fix things. I'm going to just remind you folk, if you want to, please use the chat box. And if you've got any questions that Pete and I can answer for you, or if you'd like to join in the discussion, then and just let us know. But I'm going to hand over to Pete, and let's see what he has to tell us.
Thank you, Lloyd. That was a great story, but I didn't hear much about games in that. I actually heard about skill and guiding skill. And you've completely thrown a loop here because I'm going a bit more scatological and biological. I'm glad it's late in the evening for many of you because there probably shouldn't be children in the room. So my point with this was that guides may have all the skills in the world, and I've been fortunate to go out, I'm pretty sure, with the guide that Lloyd is talking about. If I'm not mistaken, it's an old friend of mine as well. And there's an abundance of it, and we all learn from each other. It's for such a macho-seeming industry, it's actually a really sharing place. We all like to learn from each other. But as Lloyd said, the guests often put you on a pedestal, and many of the things you do seem superhuman. You're driving along and suddenly you stop and there's a pause, and the next thing is a leopard comes out from behind a tree, and people think, how the hell did he do that? There's no way you could see it. And they go, he sensed it, as if it's something. It's like, yeah, I sensed it. I heard the alarm calls of other animals. And I saw where the monkeys were looking. There is no magic to it. It's barely a science. And just to a point, Lloyd, what you said about the lion looking at your tracks, there's a really fascinating man in South Africa called Louis Liebenberg, and he believes that tracking was our first science. And what he thinks is that we are the first species we can see, smell, hear a predator and react accordingly, give alarm calls. But we're the first to see a track and understand it's almost a map of an animal. It's a map of where an animal was. Monkeys will walk straight over the back of a leopard tracks. They're walking behind a leopard, and they'll never recognize that they're walking behind fresh leopard tracks. And Louis Liebenberg believes that our language was spurred by the need to have tense. We had to have past tense or future tense to describe, not just to be, a monkey can say leopard, it's like really excited, but we need to say leopard, not here, not now, a while back, over there, it's gone that way. In the future, it is there. Anyway, so that's a bit of a sideline. So back to guide. So when you know something like that and you tell guests, oh, wow, that's amazing, how do you know this? And it's a bit like, they're all professionals. They've all got jobs which we have zero understanding of. And it would look like magic. If I tried to take up amateur neurosurgery, I would be as bad at it as if that neurosurgeon tried to find lions in the Okavango. So you're out there, and it's a little bit like being a dad where your kids hero worship you. But the reality is, even though most of us are pretty young when we're guiding or start out, you have all of the biological needs of every other single human being. And if anything is ever going to trip you up, it is the needs or the desires to fulfill those. And I've broken it down to the 4 S's. I actually just thought of this while Lloyd was talking because I wasn't listening to him. It's the 4 S's are sleep, sex, sustenance, and let's just call it pooing in case there are still children in the room. And you've got to do all these things. The sustenance is the easiest part of all because the lodge feeds you. You're fed extraordinarily well. It's surprising that, you'd imagine every guide is going to die of type 2 diabetes because we get fed so much, but you're relatively active. Sleep is the most sacred of commodities. Lloyd spoke about getting up at 4:30 in the morning, and you stay up until the last of your guests goes to bed. And sometimes you manage to shift it out if you work in a lodge. Guides take turns to see who's going to stay up late. And there are certain times guests arrive and you just take one look and you go, oh, this is going to be a few rough nights. And it's a few rough nights for them too, but they get to go home. We used to work back then 7 days a week, 3 months straight. And then you had 28 days off. That was fairly punitive on your body. So if you could get sleep, you took it. Now we come to the one that you should never lead off a story with. You should always finish with sex because it's everybody's favorite, obviously. A lot of people compare safari guides to ski instructors. Go, oh, what a great life. Women must be throwing themselves at you. And then if you looked at the average tourist, if they threw themselves at us, they'd break a hip. There's a saying in the industry that we get newlyweds and nearly deads. With the utmost respect to our venerable elders, it is not a place of great romantic opportunity. At the end of your 3 months, you start wishing impalas were slower. And it's one of the tragedies. I spent my late teens through almost all my 20s living in a tent. And I had to move out and I needed to meet a woman that didn't have fur. And so you get a little bit desperate on that front. So there's no great stories about that, sadly.
Oh, you loved me, Pete.
Yeah, I say Grant Woodrow's just spoken up. Both Grant and Lloyd had the great misfortune of managing camps that I worked at. Both Mombo again. In fact, at various stages, all three of us worked together. I remember people often say, what's the most scared you've been on safari? And the true answer, it was the American women's rugby team. And they got drunk and 3 of them at one point said they wanted to scrum against me. And I wasn't entirely sure whether that was a euphemism, but I knew that they were all hooker. So only if you know what rugby is will you understand that line. But so sleep is a sacred thing. You got it whenever you could. But then the truly embarrassing thing is when you're out there sometimes, you've been eating these big dinners, you're 3 months in, as I said, you eat these big breakfasts, is quite often you need the bathroom. And so if you're ever on safari and you see the guide's shoulders and they're doing this a bit like that, and then they go, tracks, let's see if they're fresh. And they run off in the bush, they go on 2 minutes and they come back and, no, they weren't as fresh as I thought. Pee or a poo, that's what they've gone off to do. But there's the other thing. One thing is all guides love boat safaris. It is beautiful. You get to see it's a completely different perspective. When you cut the motor, it's so peaceful. You see all the beautiful water birds, the malachite kingfishers, the purple gallinules, the herons, the fish eagles. And it's just a different perspective on safari. And I urge you to go on a safari in a place that you don't just do a game drive every morning, every afternoon. Get out, do a variety of activities. Your activities should be as diverse as the wildlife. So we love boat safaris, but the main reason you love boat safaris is you are free in your biology. You can rev the motor and let off any flatulence that may well have stored up inside you. And not only will the sound of the motor cover it, it whips behind you because you're moving forward. Now, when you're driving a four-wheel drive, Land Rover, Land Cruiser, whatever it might be, and you're bouncing along, sure, a big diesel engine might cover the noise, but there's no way of disguising the aroma. So I felt I mastered the art of the fart, which was driving along a bit and just sometimes you feel it brewing and you can't go off and track for 15 seconds and come back. That just looks incompetent. So what my favorite trick was, and particularly if I wasn't that fond of the guests, was you'd be bouncing along. And of course, we love all of our guests all the time. You're all wonderful human beings. We adore every single one of you. More so now. Thank you for spending money where we desperately need it. But you'd be bouncing along and you just think, oh, this is awful. But, you know, and again, you're tensing up, which probably makes it worse. This is not paying rent, needs to come out. So you'd say, oh, just up ahead here, there's a place, and 2 weeks ago, the lions killed a buffalo here. And then you could just let go. And a little like people, oh, you can still smell it. And you, yes, you can. Just drive on with a little satisfied smirk on your face, relax shoulders again. And as I said, biology rules. You may appear superhuman, but you're certainly not, and not immune to a lack of sterility on some cook's hands, perhaps. It was one morning I tried that and didn't quite work out as planned. And it was a cold winter's morning. And guides, as I said, it's a macho industry. I'd actually like to address that in a little bit. Another sort of myth of safari or game that guides play. It's a macho industry. There's always a ridiculous challenge. How far into winter can you get before you put on long pants? And similarly, before you put on, we used to have those old, these surplus German army coats, and they still have the old East German flag on them. They were wonderful, incredibly warm, and the right color for the bush. So a lot of us had those, but you wouldn't wear it for as long as you could. Apparently, as a test of your testosterone levels, which is absurd, of course. You're probably diminishing them. Certainly, the relevant parts for testosterone were shrinking. And so bouncing along, did the old dead buffalo trick, and straight away realized it had gone a little bit too far. I was like, oh, I wonder how bad that is. I just thought, I really don't know. So I had to say to the guests, tracks, I've got tracks, got to check these out. And I just ran into the bush, and I ran, and I kept checking back. Can I see the vehicle? Because if I could see the vehicle, they could see me. And I was running through, and again, this is at Mombo, which is a really predator-rich area. Didn't particularly care at that point. What little dignity I had seemed more important to maintain than my pulse. And eventually I found a bush, and I had to take off my shorts. And the only person in our camp that wore underpants was Grant Woodrow, who's on this call. In Botswana, they're very culturally sensitive about washing underpants. It's just a cultural thing. So to overcome that, we just stopped wearing them. So we didn't have to wash our own undies. Grant bribed one of the...
I know where this is going, Grant.
Yeah. Well, I'm not telling the catfish story, Grant. Don't worry.
Oh, I think I might get off while we're going well, eh?
I'm not going to tell a story about you shitting your pants, but you actually haven't. Oh, I just said the word I was trying to avoid. I'm down on my audible Tourette's. Anyway, so didn't wear underpants, so I just took off my shorts, and sure enough, there was a telltale. I don't know, what's the biggest coin in the US? In Australia, it's a 50-cent piece. I guess here it's a 50p piece. Just telltale sign that I'd gone a little too far. I'd had a bit of follow through. And it's mortifying. It's mortifying now to talk about it, but you know, I've got this to help. And so I had to take off my jersey, tie it around my waist, and walk back out and say, wow, you know, I had these leopard tracks and they just disappeared. We'll drive around this island a couple of times and just see if the tracks pop back out. And again, everybody, you're so credible as a guide. You've told them these things they never knew in their life. You've seen animals they couldn't imagine you would ever have found. So fortunately, I was believed. And then I sat there and they said, oh, aren't you cold? And I said, oh, no, I've been walking pretty fast. Took this off and I started driving, and that breeze, it didn't need much of a breeze, just you create it by driving. These are entirely open vehicles. The windshield is even folded down. You know, at that point, I think my nipples probably stuck out like oryx horns. I was that cold. And, you know, the guests are going, aren't you cold? Absolutely fine. Absolutely fine. And I must have turned blue. And of course, as a result of that, I got a pretty hideous cold. I'm on the border of one now, again, a toddler at playgroup. One day, he came back with a snotty nose after 6 months without. And I came back filthy cold. You just got to keep on working because there's not enough staff not to. So not only had I pooed my pants, the cold meant that I didn't actually sleep for a week either. So this is what's going on in the background. Lloyd said it's about games guides play. That's some of the stuff that's going on in the background. Anyway, Lloyd, back to you. I'm sure you've got something far more glorious to talk about.
Something less scatological.
Yes. I put the scat into it.
Damn it, man. There goes all the poo stories. All right. Pete, how often have you been lost as a guide? Lost.
The shorter list is how often did I know where I was?
Yeah. Okay. So folks, I'm gonna change continents here, but one of the things that happens to guides is that we get lost from time to time. Now, and that is especially for men, that is a terrifying thing for most people. Nobody likes being lost. Most people don't like the dark. They don't like being lost in the dark in particular. And so we as guides sometimes have to make it up. The reality is when you're out there on game drive, if you're particularly focused on an animal, if you're following a leopard, for example, and the driving is difficult, you're not always, and the bush is thick, and you're driving through ravines, which we call dongas, erosion gullies, you can lose your way. And if it gets dark, you'll find your way back because you can see the stars. You can see where the Southern Cross is, or Orion, and you can work out north and south, and you can plunge off in one direction, and you know that you're going to hit a road somewhere. And when you do cross the road, you'll probably recognize it, and you'll turn left or right. And if you have your wits about you, then the guests never know that you were lost at all, and you're never lost for particularly long. And so one of the games you play is, you know, keeping control at all times, even though you're sometimes deeply concerned about how long you're going to take to get back to camp. It depends on the guests. As I said, the guests make the difference in terms of how you react to things when you're under stress. If you've got guests with you who are happy to play the game, then you can quite quickly say, listen, guys, I don't really know where we are. And this is cool because I've never been in this area before. We will figure it out. No one's going to die. We will be home by lunch. It's just going to take a while. And if they want to play that game with you, then it's more fun. But the reality is that we Westerners know where we are all the time. And if we don't, we simply go into Google Maps and we look for that pulsing blue light, and then it tells us, and it's extremely reassuring, and we figure it out from there. Nobody even uses a map anymore, do we? We just follow the magenta line on your phone or on a sat nav, and that's all taken care of. But out there in the bush, it doesn't work that way. And I saw an example of a game that a guide was playing once in South America, in the Amazon. I was actually in the Peruvian Amazon, and we'd gone on boats downriver for an entire day, deep into this jungle. It was extremely exciting because it's the first time I'd been in that kind of terrain. And then after a while, we docked the boats and we plunged into the bush, and we walked in gumboots, these heavy, thick Wellington boots, through mud for ages, for hours, until we finally got to this very rustic camp. And the guide said to us, you must be ready because at any time I'll call you if I hear something, and then we're going to go and find it, day or night. And one of the things that I was particularly keen to see was howler monkeys. And we're very, very fortunate to see howler monkeys. They were calling, and he called us, and we went to saw them. It was in the daytime. We probably walked no more than a mile or two, and we came back. But that night, he came to us after dinner, and it must have been about 11 o'clock at night. And he said to us, guys, get your boots on. They're peccaries. I can hear them. Now, a peccary is a very small jungle pig. And they move in great hordes of 20 and 30 and 40 together. They're much smaller than a warthog, like just a bit bigger than a baby warthog. And the way they communicate, and they're nocturnal, like many pigs are. And the way they communicate is they clack their tusks together. And that's how they find each other in the darkness. And you can hear them and you can smell them. Very strong smell. So, and in this case, Pete, it wasn't the guide. It was definitely the pigs. So this guy said to us, come on, let's go. And we barreled out of camp. It was black. We didn't have time to get torches or anything. He said, don't worry. He said, we've got to move. We've got to hurry up. Now, the thing is that he knew I was a guide. We'd spoken a lot about Africa. He was desperate to get to Africa on safari. And he wanted to please me. He, you know, that was part of the game that he was playing, was that he wanted me to see everything. And he was working very, very hard. And I was tremendously enthusiastic and I was up for it. And so he was prepared, like the guide in Botswana, he was prepared to go the extra mile. And it was wonderful. I was getting full value for money. So he called us at 11 at night. I was with a guy called Bruce Salt. Some of you might know him. He's a Namibian friend of mine who also has worked in the safari industry. We were together at this lodge. There were two other people at the table, an Englishman and his son. And he said, well, you know, what's going on? And we said, well, we're going to try and find these pigs in the darkness. I said, do you want to come along? And he said, yeah. And they were able people. His son was a teenager and he was, I guess, in his 40s or 50s. And I'd seen them walking earlier in the day and they were up for it because I knew we were going to have to run. So I said, come on. And we barreled out of camp down these little muddy paths in the darkness with these giant Amazon trees. They go 30 meters high. They have great buttress roots. And the path winds through the darkness. And we moved in the direction of these pigs. And the guide was in a hurry. He said, they move. We have to get there. Well, we got to where they were, and I could tell that because of the smell. And I could hear the clacking of the tusks. And it was very exciting to know that they were there in these great numbers. But it was so dark. It's extremely dark inside the forest at nighttime. There's no starlight or moonlight coming through. And you can just see through the gloom. And it's kind of eerie. And the mud is sucking at your boots. And it's not for everybody. It's also very humid, very sticky and sweaty. And there's lots of mosquitoes. So not everybody's game. After a while, and we weren't even on the path at this point. This guy was trying hard to find them. And I could tell that just like that lion, we're getting further and further behind. And ultimately I said to this guy, and it was 1 o'clock in the morning. And I said to him, I don't know if we're going to find these things. Now we had to get up at about 5, I think, the next morning, because one of the wonderful things you do in the Amazon is, you know, as you probably know, it's full of macaws, which are these giant parrots, and parrots of many kinds. And they're very hard to see. Jungle birding is extremely difficult. Your neck and your shoulders get so sore from looking up all the time. And these birds are always on the tops of the trees in the sunlight, feeding. So they're hard to see. So what you do instead is you go by boat to a place where there's a salt lick. Not a salt lick, it's Pete, you'll know what I'm talking about. It's
clay. It's kaolin.
Yeah.
It's a type of clay called kaolin, which neutralizes cyanosis, which they get from a lot of the fruits and seeds. It binds cyanotic.
Yeah, which is their primary diet. So they fly at dawn every morning in their multiple thousands, all the colors of the rainbow, to these, what did you call them, Pete? Kaolin.
Kaolin, yeah. Kaolin. It's used a lot in pharmaceuticals and medicine.
Okay, so to these banks, and then they hang onto the banks and they chewed it with their beaks, and they come and go. But to do that, you have to be there. Like all game drives, on any African safari you've been on, you've got to get up early to see the good stuff. Meaning we had to get up at 5. It was now 1 in the morning. And I was starting to think, all right, I've had enough of this. It's not at all fun anymore. Now, most guides pride themselves on having a sense of direction. But let me tell you, in the Amazon at night, everything looks exactly the same. And it was dark. And we weren't even on paths. And I said to the guy, it's okay. I said to him, look, no pressure. Don't worry about that. We'll try again tomorrow. Let's go home. And he goes, all right, follow me. Now, we were tired. We'd been dashing after these things for about an hour and a half. And it's hard to run in these boots. Very sweaty. And we had no water with us because we'd left in such a hurry, expecting to find them quickly. And so we started to trudge back to camp. And we stopped at a tree, big buttress roots, very recognizable looking tree. And Bruce and I sort of took pictures of each other standing against this tree, using flash photography. And it had certain elements about it, shapes, which made it recognizable. And that was fun. And we stopped there for 5 or 10 minutes, and then we carried on. And after a while, trudging along behind this guide, I thought, and we stopped again, and I thought, this looks like the same tree to me. But I mean, there's millions of trees in the Amazon, and they're all big, and they all look pretty much the same, but I was sure it was the same tree. And I thought, oh, that's odd, but I must be mistaken. And we trudged on again. And now it was 2 a.m. And I was starting to think, all right, well, I'm very keen on all this stuff, but this is getting kind of boring, and I'd rather be in bed. I'd rather just be home at this point. And we continued to walk. And after a while, we came to a very, very big buttress root tree. And I said to the guide, dude, I know this tree. It's the same tree. I'm sure we've been here before. I mean, it sounds crazy, but haven't we been to this tree? And he pulled me aside and he said, it's the same tree. I said, why do we keep coming back to the same tree? He said, listen, don't let the other people know. So this is one of the games that guides play, right? You're never lost. And if you are, you fake it until you make it. But I'd rumbled this guy. He couldn't believe that I'd recognized the tree. He said to me quietly, I said, is everything okay? I'll never forget the words he used. He said, right now, we are lost. I said, oh, right now meaning we're not going to be lost later, and we weren't lost before, but right now we're lost. Is that right? He went, right now we're lost. I said, okay, but not knowing you are where you are and being lost is different. He said, I know where I am. I know this tree. I've seen this tree many times. I said, so how come you can't get us back to camp? He said, because I'm worried, I'm stressed. So he was feeling the pressure from me, particularly. As a guide, he always knows where he is and has knowledge about things and asks decent questions. And from the fact that everybody's getting tired. And he wasn't thinking clearly, and he was having a little panic. And he kept missing the path. So I said to him, listen, just chill. So what's the plan then? How do we get back? How far is the lodge, do you think, if you know where this tree is? He says, I reckon that camp is probably 1 kilometer from here, but I just can't find it. And I said, what are you trying to do then? I mean, when we blunder around, he says, there's a pathway I'm looking for. But he says, we keep crossing it in the dark, and then I don't see it, and then we end up back here again. So I said, okay, well, what does it take to, and remember, we had no lights with us. What does it take to find the path? He said, no, I just need to go slowly. I said, so go slowly. We're happy for slow. Slow is good. He said, no, but I can't, when you walk in behind me, then I can't find it. I said, all right, I'll tell you what. We'll wait at this tree. If you say that you know where this tree is, we're going to wait at this tree, and we're not going to move from this tree. How far away do you think the path is? He said, it can't be more than a few hundred meters. I said, all right. I said, you go looking for that path, and you keep shouting to us, and I'll keep shouting back to you. And you must never get out of earshot, because I'd had a look at the English guy and his son, and their eyes were getting pretty large. And I remember he was wearing glasses, and they're permanently fogged, and he kept wiping them clean. The guy was starting to have a bit of a panic. So I said, and when you find that path, then you can lead us to it. And he said, okay, that's a very good idea. And I thought, how come I have to tell this guy this? You would have thought it'd be pretty obvious. But he was feeling the pressure, and he wasn't thinking. Well, lo and behold, off he went, and we shouted to each other. I reckon it didn't take 10 minutes, and he had the path. And he called us, and we walked to him. And when we got to that path was this narrow. I mean, it was only this wide. It was this little trail through the forest. How he saw it in the darkness, I can imagine how he missed it, but how he found it, I don't know. And he said, this is the path. And I said, all right, well, which way now? He says, no, you go this way. And I think we were back in camp in about 20 minutes. And he was extremely embarrassed about that. So one of the lessons I think that he learned maybe from me that night, he was an experienced guide, and we traded stories, is that sometimes it's better just to fess up if you're lost, and tell people and bring them in and give them the information they need so that they know what we're dealing with here. Because if you're going to keep playing that game of not being lost, ultimately you're going to get more lost and you're going to lose. And so I guess my question, Pete, is, what's your lost story?
Which one? I think I've been lost since I was about 16. And again, I think lost is almost a state of mind.
Can I just interrupt you, Pete? Remember at Mambo, we used to cross through at the Simbira Baobab and cross through the channel. What is that channel called? Simbira, I guess.
Yeah,
what is it called?
Simbira, yeah.
And just head out in the direction of Kizera, sort of over those open plains, and
deliberately
and get lost.
There were no tracks there.
Yeah.
And it was wonderful. I mean, one of the great things, particularly in the Okavango and maybe even more so in Namibia, is you go to a place and there's no indication of what year it is. If you didn't grow up in Africa, your image of Africa is this place that is boundless and time has stood still. And the disappointing reality, of course, is it's not an ocean of wildlife with little pockets of humanity. It's humans, and small islands of wilderness and wildlife within it. And so when you can get to these places in Botswana where you can stop the vehicle and you look around, and aside from the vehicle you're in, there's not a single thing that tells you what year it is. It could be 20,000 years ago, 50,000 years ago. That to me is the greatest moment in travel. It's the places you can time travel. I've only ever found it in wilderness areas, except once in the city of Damascus, where you could go back hundreds of years in certain places. But I imagine it's not such a great place to go now. But I actually, sorry, as you were talking, Lloyd, I found a picture, and I'm going to try something here. Hey, you've disabled screen sharing. It's not porn, Lloyd. Let me in.
No, that's not me. You have to ask Carmen for that.
Carmen, would you mind letting me share the screen? It's very pertinent to the story that you were just telling.
I'll just make you co-host for a second then here.
Okay. That's a dangerous thing to do.
Lloyd, you're on.
If I do that, you know that, Carmen, you know
so
that. So
Lloyd was talking about kaolin. I don't know, can you all see this now? This is a cave. So just so you know, Lloyd and I are living the same life, just in a different order. And we both lived and worked in Botswana together at the same time. We both lived in Japan. We both spent a lot of time in South America, both guided in South Africa. The only thing is Lloyd hasn't lived in Australia, but now we both live in the UK. So we're doing this together. So anyway, in different timings. This is a cave filled with this mineral kaolin, and it has been dug by peccaries and monkeys as they dig up this particular type of clay. The peccaries can only reach that bottom shelf, and the monkeys, spider monkeys, get the top. And so you end up with this perfect shelf all the way through until it collapses, and they'll dig in. So that just shows you how valuable this is. If you're in the rainforest, so if you're in the Kalahari, obviously water is gold and every animal's seeking it out. If you're in the rainforest, water is so abundant, it's salts and minerals that get washed away, that become what water is in the desert. And any environment you're in, if you can find what the gold is, then you're going to find the animals. If you can figure that out. And so we'd sit in Botswana by the water because it's the Kalahari Desert. In South America, if you can find a salt or a clay leg, that's where you'd be. And funnily enough, you say that your peccaries are small. I've also lost my dignity then, and I spent an entire evening up a tree once because of them. But I'm going to stop sharing my screen now.
where was that taken, Pete?
That was in a place called Yasuni National Park in Ecuador.
Ecuador.
And it's the most biodiverse national park in the world, home to 3 ethnic groups, the Warani, the Tagaeri, and the Taramanani. And only the Warani have contact with the outside world. And that only began in 1957. So it's a really remote, extraordinary place. Definitely got lost in there. Been lost in a lot of places, also been lost looking for howler monkeys, funnily enough, and completely befuddled myself. I was alone and I could hear the generator of the camp, but I have a weird affliction where I can't tell what direction sound comes from. And I learned it quite late in life. In fact, I was working on a building site and the laborers figured it out. They figured out if they shouted for me from the top floor of the building, I'd walk to the bottom and vice versa. And I looked back on the number of times I'd been leading walking safaris. I said, wow, there's a lion over there. It's growling at us. That's the warning growl. It sounds like a tractor size. Oh, so over there, lion. And it's telling us not to go there. People go, oh, I heard the lion over there. And I go, we're surrounded. And of course, they were correct. I go, well, this one was close and serious. Let's go this way. So I'd walk them straight into the lion that was growling. Not a good confession to make because I still guide a bit. But yeah, just don't trust my sound direction. I once got lost for 4 days in a boat with 2 friends, one of whom I think might have been your drunken guide. And 4 of the best days of my life. No, we weren't going to die, as Lloyd said. We went with tourists, but thank goodness. But
just so that you know, Peter, it actually wasn't that guy.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
It was the other guy then. Ex-Natal Parks Board?
No.
Not him then. Wow.
I'm not going to say. I'm not going to say because I still have to work with him.
Yeah. Okay. So.
Oh, it's just Grant Woodrow. No, it wasn't. Sorry.
It was Craig Rutter. But I'm going to go back a step, Lloyd, and I'm going to disappoint you by not carrying on with the lost theme.
No, that's fine.
So going back to the biology of guides, and you might feel you've had enough. I mentioned that sex wasn't on the table when you worked in Botswana. Well, it was, but it wasn't a table you wanted to eat from necessarily. And I'm not going to carry on with that metaphor because it's going to get really disgusting. But in South Africa, it was a different thing, different price points, you attracted different markets, and you would get young people through. And if you're incredibly lucky, some of them might be a woman who was single or willing to act as if she was. And I was so young. I was the barman when I was in South Africa. Nothing was going to happen for me, but my colleagues used to have this game they would play, because I'm actually sticking to Lloyd's theme. And one of the things was they'd sit at the dinner table and they'd have an attractive woman or just a woman they were attracted to in their vehicle. They'd make sure they sat next to her at dinner. They'd say, listen, I'd love to stay up and have a few drinks with you, but I've got to go out and poaching patrol tonight. And she'd say, oh, poaching patrol. Was like, oh, listen, it's so boring. We have professional anti-poaching units, but we know that the more movement of vehicles there are, the harder it is for people to poach. So you just drive around for a few hours. It's really boring. You're out there by yourself. You see some nice animals. That's great, but you're just out there. And of course, oh, that sounds amazing. Can I come with this? Oh, no, it's just not allowed. And so, no, but, oh, well, I don't hear this. And you've got to get up early in the morning. I'm going to be waking up at 5:30 in the morning. Go get your sleep. And of course, they'd insist. Okay. And the guys would go out, and inevitably they would have one of those incredibly deep and meaningful 48-hour relationships after that, before the woman moved on. And as I said, I did all my guiding in Botswana where that never happened, unfortunately. And my wife's in the next room listening. So moving on from that could often lead to a lack of sleep. A lack of sleep, as I said, was something which really starts to stack up. When you're guiding, you are in a state of exhaustion most of the time. And when I was working in camps run by Lloyd or Grant, they used to have these camp managers are up there first thing, same time as the guests. back then, somehow it seemed absolutely fine for the guides to manage the morning. And so we'd get there, we'd make sure there was tea and coffee set up and a little bit of fruit and the small breakfast. And if I don't have any Germanic elements to my personality, except I'm obsessively punctual. Don't know why. So I was always the first one up there in the morning. I just like to make sure, and I like to have a cup of coffee already down and on my second one before the first guests arrived. And every now and then, your alarm clock battery went flat. You know, this was pre-smartphone. It was literally a little straight out of a $1 shop, as it was back then. And the little AA battery or AAA battery would go flat. Your alarm didn't go off. And I used to say to the guys I worked with, if I'm not there when you come up, come and get me. I'm undoubtedly. And they just never would. I never understood that either. It's a Botswana mindset. And so the number of times where one vehicle would leave, this next vehicle would leave, the last guide was there with his guests, and my guest would be standing going, "Where's Peter?" And he'd say, I'll go and find him. He's probably overslept. Here comes a bus, but it's not going to pick you up. And so he'd come and they'd wake me up. And of course, you'd be bleary eyes. Like, oh, and you realize straight away, just from the heat of the sun and how light it was, I'd overslept. So jump up, and my trick, which fortunately I didn't have to use very often, but I absolutely honed, was I would go up to my vehicle and rub my face on the tires. Rub my face on the tires, rub my hands on the tires. It hid the baggy eyes. I covered the skewed up hair, and I'd drive through. It's like, listen, really sorry, everybody. I came out and I had 2 flats. I've been changing them for the past half hour. Didn't these guys tell you that? Pile everybody in, and out you go, you're yawning. And I don't know how many of them I fooled, but a lot were from the States. Sorry then.
Is that the story, Pete?
That's it.
Okay. Thanks, mate. Yeah, it's one of the most embarrassing things, isn't it? Being late. I want to talk about, I think most of the people here have been on African safaris. It might be that people have been on safaris in India, Sri Lanka, or a few other places. But Pete and I were having a conversation earlier this week, actually. He's something that I've not yet done. It's on the list. The life list is seeing a tiger in the wild. I've tried that in Nepal without success, and I haven't been to India. And Pete has been to India, and he's got an experience there about that. But I went last year 2 years ago to Sri Lanka. Now, you may or may not know that leopards are the most widespread of the large cats, and they exist all the way from Cape Town through Africa, except for the true deserts, across the Middle East, India, into China, and including Sri Lanka. And Sri Lanka, as you well know, is an island. And so there's a subpopulation of leopards on the island of Sri Lanka. And when I went there, one of my goals was to see a leopard. And there's several national parks there. One of them is called Yala National Park. It's on the southeastern corner. It happens to be a place also that was tragically affected by the tsunami, that huge tsunami that happened in, 20 years ago now, I suppose, something like, where so many thousands of people died. And there were lots of people in the park when that happened. There was a hotel there. The hotel was utterly washed away. I went to the site where the hotel was, and all you could see was the foundations and the tiled floors. But that's Yala. And they said that they have habituated leopards. Now, we've talked about habituation, and just to remind you, habituated animals are ones that don't mind us being in their presence, but it takes a while to earn their trust. And if we behave consistently, they will allow us to watch them while they go about their daily lives without any concern. And that has happened in many places across the world. And one of them is at Yala National Park, and they have leopards. And I was desperate to see. I had a single day in the park. And so I booked a guide, thinking, because what you want to do is you book a private guide, because I think Pete might explain next what it's like looking for tigers in India on a shared vehicle. And by the way, that can also happen in an African situation, particularly these days in Etosha National Park. unfortunately. A less than savory experience with poor guides. So I'd booked a private guide. And I have to, and so when you are on a game drive being guided by a Sri Lankan, who, by the way, the Sri Lankans there speak amazing English. That sort of quaint Victorian style of English. It's really interesting to hear them telling you about things. And he says that, and I said to him, can we focus on trying to find a leopard? And he said, yeah, absolutely. And I said, but can you try and take us to places where no one else goes? And he said, well, there's only one place where the leopards go, and that's where we're going to go. And it seemed that, from what I could ascertain, is that there was one relaxed leopard there. He was a big male, and he always used to follow, and you know, leopards are animals of habit. They tend to walk in the same places. They mark their territory. They drink at the same places. They tend to hunt the same kind of prey if it's available. And so they had this leopard. And this story is slightly negative. It's what happens when your expectations are too high. And then you put the guide under a bit of pressure, which is what I'd inadvertently done. So we went on the game drive and we saw Asian elephants, but wild elephants, of course, not the domesticated ones that they use for logging. And they were very interesting, although to be perfectly frank, slightly disappointing compared to the African ones, which are just so much bigger and more magnificent and much less pink. And we saw those and we saw deer, and it was actually fantastic. And then the guy said to me, all right, now it's time for the leopard. And the way he said that, it sounded a little bit like we were going grocery shopping, as in, you know, now we're going to do vegetable aisle, and then we'll do the tin goods, and after that we'll do the meat. And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, it's, you know, it's getting on towards 10. We need to go and see the leopard. Now, that is a terrible approach to be taking, because that guy isn't playing the game. There's a certain amount of subterfuge that is necessary to create the magic of safari. Even if the leopard is regularly found in the same sort of place, you still don't want to be selling it that way. But he was very direct about it. But what happened was this, was as we rolled towards the leopard, where he said the leopard was, and by the way, can you imagine, it's actually very much like a low-felt scene, a bush-felt scene, but with the sea, but with the beach behind it. It's the most extraordinary place. And with water buffalo, you know, Asian buffalo scattered around. It looks very African, except the animals are just slightly different. Although there's quite a lot of overlap, particularly with birds. And so we're rolling towards this, and he says, you know, you can see in the distance that fallen tree. I said, yeah. He said, the leopard will be on that. Now, he didn't play the game properly, that guy. He should have built it up, had me in anticipation, not pretended to see it, because I could see there were other cars there to find it. There were other cars there. But he should have made me much more excited about the fact I was about to see an Asian leopard. And then a funny thing happened. I saw a movement on the right-hand side of the car, and I looked at it, and I couldn't. Pete, what's the name of the bear? I've just forgotten it now that we're talking about.
It's a sloth bear.
Yeah, sloth bear, exactly. I was going to say sun bear. That's a different thing. I saw a bear next to the car. Now you imagine, I've got a kind of an African mentality about game drive and what we're going to see, and it looks rather familiar, except that there's a beach over there. And I saw a bear walking through the bush, a sloth bear. And now that, by the way, is a much more exciting sighting than a leopard. First one and the only one I've ever seen. And also, you know, a bear and a leopard in the same scene, that's weird and wonderful. So my day was working out really well, actually. And the guides, and I went, hey, stop, look at this. There's a, you know, I didn't know what it was. I said, it looks like a bear. And then I recognized it. He went, yeah, it's a sloth bear. And he kept driving. And I said, dude, stop the car. What are you doing? He said, no. He said, don't worry. We need to go and see the leopard. And then maybe sloth bear's next. I said, no, my friend, you've got this whole thing wrong. Stop the damn car. I started getting angry with him. And so unwillingly stopped the car. And he said to me, the problem is now we've lost our line. Now we've lost our place in the queue. Now, when we get to the leopard, which is only a few hundred meters away, now we're going to be like the 15th car there. Now look what you've done. He started blaming me. And I said to him, you know what? just give me the sloth bear. If I don't see the leopard, I'm totally cool with it. So we looked at the sloth bear, and then we went and took our place in the queue. And that might sort of be closer to where Pete is going with his next story. But what did happen was it turned out very, very well, because the sloth bear, as we stopped, because we lost him, he moved off into the bush, and we're not allowed to go off-road there. And he said, we'll go and wait at the leopard. And we got a decent sighting of that leopard too. And the sloth bear arrived in the same sighting. And so in my camera shot, I've got a magnificent big male leopard in a tree, perfectly clear, with the sea behind him, and a sloth bear, if you can imagine that, walking through the front of the picture. So actually, what happened there was that Sri Lanka and its wilderness did the work. And that's what happens with guiding, is that guides can get a bit lazy, very lazy sometimes, because nature does all of this stuff for you, and you can rest on it, you can be piggybacked. And our job as guides is to interpret and to explain and to unlock the experience, and sometimes not to talk too much, actually. And so that guide got away with it. He then did something, he got away with it because nature spoke. He wasn't particularly good. When we got back to the gate, he then said to me, what size tip are you going to give me? How much money? I don't know if that's what you want to talk about now, but unfortunately, that is one of the prime motivating factors for many young guides in the industry today. Over to you.
Yeah, I don't want to talk about that. That's a whole kettle.
No, another discussion.
Just a guide that Grant and I once worked with. Remember, Grant, I'm sure you're in the room where we said, we're talking about who our favorite people were to guide. And he said, Americans. We said, why is that? And he said, in God we trust. Nothing to do with religion.
Yeah.
He loved getting the greenbacks.
Yeah.
Yeah, and again, it's I don't want this to be a negative story. My wife and I honeymooned in India. Many wonderful experiences. We saw 3 snow leopards. Had amazing times. I went to one of the best eco lodges I've been to in my life, out in the Thar Desert. But then we went, then we went to a place called Satpura that I loved. It was the only proper wildlife reserve I loved, because there are very few tigers. And so the focus was actually on bears, and the people that went there were really into nature. Our guides were guides. To this day, our guide who was there is a friend of ours. On his honeymoon, he came and stayed at our house with his brand new wife. They broke up soon after, and I really hope we're not responsible for that. But amazing place, great guides. And then we got to the tiger reserves, and I've been told to lower my expectations, but I hadn't been told to flush them down the toilet and then swim after them. The guides in it didn't matter if you just said, we are interested in all aspects here. I'd made the mistake of one saying, I like birds. So he stopped for every bird. And it'd be an Indian roller, which is great. It's like a lilac-breasted roller that's been through the wash a few many times. So it's like, that's lovely, thank you. And you stop again, Indian roller. It's like, got it. Next one, Indian roller. Please, I hate birds. And then he just went back to this guy would have given Schumacher, whoever's the rally champion, a run for his money. And it was 3 reserves in a row were like this, just full speed. And sometimes you'd drive full speed and then you'd slam on the brakes. And you just sit there for a minute and go, did we win? Who were we racing? I didn't see the race. So, finally, and I think it was the 3rd reserve, we got a glimpse of a tiger in a distance. And it was great. I'd seen a wild tiger. But there was this enormous disappointment with it. I'd never seen a tiger. I've seen, by this point, lions and leopards in Africa. I've now seen snow leopards as well. Of all the big cats, it's like I've finally lost my virginity, but with my sister. You just go, I never need to do that again. That was horrible. That was awful. So yeah, I'm sure there are places that do it better than that. And if any of you got suggestions, let me know. But I even said to Lloyd, it's like, don't go looking for wild tigers. Just don't do it. It's horrible. That's pretty much it. A really crude joke and I'm done.
So to underline, the reason I wanted you to mention that, and also the Sri Lanka experience for me, was the fact that it helps us to put things in perspective. The people tuned in this evening have been on African safari primarily, and I hope will. And generally speaking, the experience of an African safari is amazing. And I think that the guides mostly do a very good job. There's lots and lots of reserves opening these days, more and more camps requiring more and more staff, which means more and more guides. And so you get lots of young guides entering the profession, which they need to do. And some of them are fantastic, and some of them are more motivated by money than the love of the bush, which can be distracting if you get one of those guides. But mostly, and particularly the places that Pete and I are privileged to go to, we have incredible experiences every single time we go out, I'm very, very happy to say. And that's the game that those guides are playing, which is to give you as a safari client, as a guest, as a friend, as a companion, the very, very best experience that you can. And these guys give out the energy. And they want you as a guest, as a client, to give it back, because then they know what's working. It's so difficult. It's a little bit like Zoom. You can have a Zoom safari sometimes, but live, where everybody is on mute. You can't see their faces properly. There's just kind of the little blurry things, and the guests are sitting there, and there's not much interaction, and you're thinking, am I doing a good job here, or I don't know. I'm not getting anything back. And afterwards, after the game drove, you question them, and they absolutely adored it. They loved every moment. They'll relate it in detail, but sometimes, you can't read that while it's live. And it might just be that they're overawed by the experience. It might just be that they're nervous. A combination of all of those. And so I'm encouraging you, if you're on a safari, to try to interact with your guides and milk that guide's enthusiasm, because that's what they want to give you. All they're waiting for is permission to tell scatological stories. So I'm going to conclude it here this evening. It's fantastic. Pete, thanks very much for joining us. I really appreciate it. And always good to be in touch with Pete. He's a good friend. I count him as a good friend, and long may it last. Folks, and Prue, of course, who I hope is still tuned in, or she's taking care of the kids now.
Hello, Lloyd. I'm here.
Oh, hello, Prue. Cool. Good to hear you. Just a little update. I'm not going to spend any more than a minute on this. Africa's still basically closed. Namibia has just opened up, it seems. Zambia is open. Tanzania is open. Kenya is open. Rwanda is open. South Africa, the president will be speaking on the 15th. Let's see, 5 days. Let's see what he has to say. Most of these African safari destinations are putting lots of pressure on the governments to at least gently open things up, because as you very well know, there's enormous financial pressure on the safari industry. And if there's no people in the beds, it's not going to work. But of course, everybody's gathering themselves for a huge year next year, and that's what we hope is going to happen. United Airlines announced, I believe, yesterday that they're going to fly directly from Newark to Johannesburg, that direct flight again, but only from March, daily flights. So there are moves out there to help Africa, to help African safari, and we're all waiting for, more signs of hope that things will return to normal. Because, as I said last time, without the tourist dollar, biodiversity and animal life, as well as the people that live in and around them, will suffer. So, holding thumbs. Next time, which is 3 weeks now, 3 weeks time, what date is that? The 1st of October. That's the first Thursday in October, which is the 1st. We're going to talk about hyenas. There's a lot we need to say about hyenas. They get a bad rap, and they are the coolest animals in the bush. So we're going to be talking about hyenas, and I look forward very much to seeing you all again on this forum. Thanks very much for tuning in. We're not going to switch it all off. If you want to chat, we can unmute you and then go ahead. Thanks a lot, folks. Cheers.
Thanks, Lloyd.
Thanks, mate.
Thank you, Lloyd. Thank you, Lloyd.
You're welcome. Moira Camp, you can go to bed now.
Thank you to everybody who came along and listened.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. Thanks.